The Philippines is a genetic glitch. Most places have one, maybe two ancient human migration events. The Philippines, they've had five. We're talking about the place where the now lost Homo luzonensis called its home, and where modern tribes today can boast the highest percentage of Denisovan DNA. Stay tuned for the most complex human puzzle on the planet. Hi, I'm Krutik. I have a PhD in genetics, and today we're going to talk about the ancient migration events that took place over the last 67,000 years to create the modern Philippines. The Philippines is a favorite destination of passport bros, foodies, and divers. But if we look past the beaches, we can see glimpses of one of the most complex parts of the human story. See, when we usually talk about big migration events that happened tens of thousands of years ago, we are talking about one, maybe two groups of people that can call themselves the source populations of a geographic area. However, with the Philippines, we have to discuss five separate migration events that happened in the ancient times. And when the first anatomically modern Homo sapiens arrived in the Philippines, they were not alone. Homonins have inhabited the Philippines for at least 67,000 years. We have archaeological evidence for an offshoot of Homo erectus that became landlocked in Luzon. In Calo Cave, Homo luzonensis was discovered, an ancient hominin that could have drafted or washed up on these islands. But for our species, Homo sapiens, the story has been rewritten. It was long considered that a self-identifying group of Negrito people, such as the model Ayta, were considered to be the first peoples of the Philippines. But what if I told you new DNA evidence has made that assumption far too simplistic? To prove this, researchers conducted a monumental genetic study. They genotyped 1,028 individuals from 155 distinct cultural communities covering the entirety of the Filipino archipelago. They sequenced roughly 2.3 million SNPs per individual. That gives us a lot of data and a lot of ground to make some bold statements. And the results? They were quite shocking. Now let's put this all together and build a definitive timeline of the Philippines based on this new data. Bear in mind, water levels are not what they are today. They were to the tune of 120 meters lower up until around 18,000 years ago. So some parts of the Philippines had land bridges. 67,000 years ago, hominins were already here. Homo luzonensis, a likely offshoot of Homo erectus, could have used water vessels to cross onto Luzon and live here. 50,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans, the Basal Australasians, entered the fray. They moved into the Philippines, again likely using water vessels to get onto the northern regions such as Luzon. We know that the Basal Australasians were secluded in the northern parts of the Philippines for a very, very long time, and we'll show data to prove this later in the video. We know the first anatomically modern humans, ancestors of the modern Northern Negritos, they encountered a group of Denisovans which were endemic to the islands. The Basal Australasians and the Denisovans interbred, which is why their modern descendants, the Ayta, Arta, and Acta have the highest percentage of Denisovan DNA on the planet. And the Denisovans of the Philippines must have been quite unique. They were not as similar as East Asian or Siberian variants of their species. We think this as Denisovan DNA found in the modern Northern Negritos is quite specific and different to Denisovan DNA found in other Australasian or Asian groups. Around 46,000 years ago, the water levels would have risen. The ancestors of the self-describing North Negritos, the Ayta, Arta, and Acta get trapped on Luzon. The water vessels which they used to reach The Philippines, likely from Sunderland, were not advanced enough to bridge the widening gaps to the southern islands of the modern Philippines. Around 37,000 years ago, a second wave of Australasians entered the Philippines, the Southern Negritos, which also descended from the same Basal Australasians the Northern Negritos descended from. They entered via the Sulu archipelago. These were the ancestors of the modern Mamanwa tribe. The southern Mamanwas were more genetically similar to other Australasian and Papuan peoples than they are to the Northern Negritos. This indicates they seldom had contact with the Northern Negrito groups. So what happened to these Denisovan tribes? The Northern Negritos at some point between around 50,000 and 37,000 years ago definitely mixed genes with them. And by the time of this second wave of Negritos, these genes were no longer mixable. So in theory, the Denisovans were extinct on the Philippines by 37,000 years ago. Or the range which the Denisovans existed on the Philippines only included the northern regions like Luzon. In any case, they went extinct, and the only surviving people today who carry the genetics of this endemic tribe of Denisovans that's specific to the Philippines are the descendants of the Northern Negrito. And in contrast, the Southern Negritos, such as the modern Manamwa, they have significantly less Denisovan DNA than their northern counterparts. Moving back to our timeline, between 15,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago, the era of East Asia begins in the Philippines. 3 separate waves of basal East Asian descendants arrive. At this point, the archipelago was more or less in full swing. One set of islanders would be very easily cut off from another set of islanders. Around 12,000 years ago, several Australasian-speaking Papuan-related East Asian groups diverged. What we can conclude based on genetic data is that there were 2 separate waves of nomadic East Asians that entered the Philippines between 15,000 and 12,000 years ago. The final piece of the puzzle is one of the most unique tribes of humans on the planet. The Cordillerans split from the ancient indigenous Taiwanese and entered the Philippines around 8,000 years ago. Incidentally, the Cordillerans are the least mixed Basal Asians on the planet. In a way, this makes them the most Asian Asians, and we'll get onto the data that proves this. Okay, visualize this with me. On this PCA, we have 1,028 unique genomes from 155 Filipino tribes across the whole archipelago. Each individual has over 2 million SNPs genotyped and contrasted against other individuals from European, African, Oceanian, and Asian backgrounds. We see some really interesting features. Look at the Filipino Cordillerans in this green color. They sit on the razor's edge between the East Asians and Southeast Asian groups. This is huge. This indicates they have remained genetically distinct for a large amount of time, separating themselves from other Asian groups. In other words, they are the most Asian Asians that we know of. Meanwhile, the Filipino Negrito populations are scattered along a cline, a genetic slope or pattern, stretching between East and Southeast Asians and Oceanians. Now let's look solely at the Filipino data. What do over 2 million SNPs of just the Filipinos look like on a PCA? If we zoom solely on the Filipino peoples, the Negritos, Cordillerans, Mangyan, Samadilut, and Manobo, we see a ton of variation. Let's call the center of the plot the core Filipino identity. Since we are talking about modern people, we have to take this with a pinch of salt. We won't be able to exclude modern admixture from European peoples, such as a large amount of Spanish influence in modern years. However, we can still see some really interesting highlights. The Negritos are the furthest away, genetically distinct. However, that is not the full story. They exhibit a long cline, likely an artifact of a long period of separation we see in the northern and Southern Negritos, which we covered in the previous part where we discussed how these two waves of people migrated separately onto the Philippines. There is also the consideration of the higher amount of Denisovan DNA in the modern Northern Negritos. We should also consider geography. The Southern Negrito populations are in a closer proximity to the later arriving East Asian groups, and therefore probably had a higher propensity towards mixing genes. Another interesting artifact can be found from the Sama de Lut. These Asians split into two clusters, one near the core Filipino identity and one much further away. This is likely due to recent mixing events and geographic isolation of some of the further tribes in the southern Philippines, and the Cordillerans point way away from the core in their own unique direction. Now let's look at admixture analysis. Imagine a different paint color for each ancestral lineage. By tracking over 2.3 million SNPs, we can identify which variants or mutations come from which ancestral lineage, and how much admixture or interbreeding there has been between multiple lineages. Immediately, a bright pink wave washes over us. This is likely due to the new Filipino variants that have come from more recent admixture, likely Europe. Let's call this the new Filipino component. Think of these pink variants as noise, and using that as a baseline, we can mathematically extract the variants that are specific for each of the ancient clans of the Philippines. See this strong green component? That's the Basal East Asian set of mutations. Who has it? The Cordillerans. That's who. And if you look closely, you can see traces of green sprinkled across all the other subgroups. This tells us the ancestors of the Cordillerans mixed with everyone. But the reverse is absolutely not true. We seldom see any of the other four ancient clans' signals inside of the modern Cordillerans. They gave DNA, but they didn't so much take it. The exception? That's the Ayta Negritos, a branch of the Northern Negrito groups. We see the strong red variants inside some of the Cordillerans. Conversely, Mangyan and Sama and the Manabo carry these distinct purple, blue, and yellow variants. Two things become historically very clear. First, the Manabo are the most well-mixed group on the Philippines. They have a heavy dose of these new pink variants, but also they carry a lot of other variants from the other groups as well. And second, the ancient waves that created the modern Philippines still exist today. This indicates a heavy amount of separation, isolation, and possibly a small amount of conflict that has kept these genes intact within these tribes for millennia. Before the modern era, which includes a large influx of Spanish admixture, 5 unique waves of anatomically modern humans arrived and made the Philippines their home. The Philippines is frankly one of the most genetically distinct places on the planet. It houses 2 distinct Basal Australasian groups and 3 distinct Basal East Asian groups, including one, the Cordillerans, which we can summarize as being the most Asian Asians. We also see the highest level of Denisovan DNA anywhere on the planet, here in the Northern Negritos. Modern tribes that exist here have up to 5% of their DNA from the Denisovans. And honestly, this was a really fun video to make. The mixing of different groups is always fascinating. It can give us historical contexts that we can't get from history books or from artifacts. And perhaps that's nowhere more apparent than in the United States. I made a video exploring the admixture levels of whites, blacks, and Hispanics in modern America, but the YouTube algorithm didn't reward it so much, so I'm going to try and plug it here. If you enjoyed this one, I promise you, you will enjoy that one too. Consider checking it out. I've been Krutik, follow this channel, and follow me on X. Hit the bell for more notifications, and please subscribe to the Scientific Journal Club. It really, really helps. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time for more science.